Hello and welcome to Setting the Stage, episode 48, Udy and Pendragon. I'm really excited about this episode, especially because I started my sort of RPG journey with Arthurian legends, and then moved into Lord of the Rings, and then into actual RPGs after that, sort of following that same trajectory that the development of RPGs has had. So this is a really fun episode, and I think you'll all really enjoy it. I'm here today with Udy to talk about King Arthur and Pendragon, which is pretty fun. Hi, Udy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And before we get into like RPG stuff, can we hear who you are outside of RPGs and all that?
Sure. I'm 24 years old.
Mhm.
I'm technically an American citizen, but my parents are Indian. They were just working in America when I was born.
Okay.
I grew up in the U.S., India, and Hong Kong. Hong Kong being the longest. I went to college back. I went to American schools the whole time. I went to college back in the U.S. I started playing RPGs around 4 years ago during the pandemic.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people got into RPGs around the same time. My first game was actually Seventh Sea, and Pendragon was my second game after that Seventh Sea campaign wrapped up.
Okay.
And typically, when asked about my favorite games, I go Pendragon number one and Seventh Sea number two.
Seventh Sea was the Palladium or something. I'm forgetting the system it was for.
It was a unique system designed by John Wick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So a very basic overview of it is you have like your list of traits and skills. Like traits are like brawn or finesse. There's also one called panache.
Mhm.
And then you've got skills like athletics, weaponry, things like that. When you're doing a scene, you decide what your approach is going to be for the scene, and then everybody rolls dice at the beginning of the scene. So not for each individual task, but at the beginning of the scene. And then you look at the dice you rolled. It's D10s. So you look at the dice you rolls, and you match them to create pairs of 10s. So for example, if I'm rolling 5 dice, and I've got a 1 and a 9, and a 2 and an 8, and a 5, then I've got 2 pairs of 10s.
Okay.
2 pairs that add up to 10. And it could be like if it's like a 3 and an 8, that also counts because it goes over 10.
Gotcha.
Then if you have any dice that are not able to be matched, those are separate. So the number of matches you get, the number of sets of 10 you get, you can also get like 3 dice adding up to a set of 10. So the number of sets of 10 you get is a raise, and that's like an action you can take in the scene. And so you're basically rolling at the start of the scene to see what your action economy is. So some people get like 5 actions, some people might get like 3 actions.
Mhm.
And then during the scene, you play out those actions and you automatically succeed. Within limits, there are limits, but you
Okay.
automatically succeed at the thing you're trying to do. Some things cost 2 raises, for example, but that's basically how it works. And then the extra dice you have left over that did not count towards a raise, the game master can buy those from you, which gives you a hero point and gives the game master a danger point. And these points activate special abilities on either side. So it's a very like narrative oriented storytelling game.
Uh-huh.
Very challenging. It requires a lot of improv skills, and it has a lot of GM overhead, which is a major reason why people are turned off by the system. But my game master was excellent for it, and I do want to run it myself at some point because I love that game and I love the setting. I think it's got one of the best settings in RPGs.
Okay. That's a bit of an unusual start going with like Seventh Sea and
Oh yeah.
Pendragon. Like, where's the D&D?
So between Seventh Sea and Pendragon, I was supposed to do a D&D campaign, and I joined and I played 2 sessions and I dropped it because I hated it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, I could see compared to
And this
Seventh
is not with
Sea.
that group. It was with a different group, but so it was that the dungeon master wasn't as good, but honestly, I think the dungeon master was fine. The role play parts of that game were excellent. I think it's when we hit combat that I immediately went, oh, I hate this. One of the things about Seventh Sea and Pendragon is with both these games, initiative is not done sequentially. I mean, in Seventh Sea, it kind of is. It's a little complicated, but actions usually occur simultaneously with one another.
Mhm.
And in both these games, even though there are technically rules for how you go through and give everyone equal attention, there's also a lot of flexibility to just turn the camera to face wherever the drama is the strongest.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
so so that was something. I mean, even today I was playing a session which has like regular D&D style sequential initiative. And one of the things I really struggle with is I feel like when a character is making a certain action, my character would immediately reflexively respond to that with something, but I can't do that until it's my turn. So after having played RPGs for 4 years, I recognize it as a necessary evil, the way initiative works. But um, when I tried D&D, oh god, I hated it because I could not get immersed. I was immediately thrown out of the story. I was immediately thrown out of the situation. I yeah. But that was just one of many problems I had with the system. I just didn't enjoy it in those two sessions at all.
No, I get it. Like the combat is very different, and it like you said, it is sort of a having initiative structured that way is sort of a necessary evil of that.
Yeah, yeah.
You can get
Um,
away from in an initiative system like that, but it's a bit difficult.
yes. I didn't come here to rant about D&D. uh, but there are things I like about it, and I'm glad that there's a game that exists that meets the needs of most people. But I tend to gravitate towards games that focus a little bit more on drama, on heartache, on uh, on like characters and their story arcs, things like that. D&D can do that, but often a lot of it is outside of the system. I like games that bring it into the mechanics.
Gotcha. So you got started while you were moving around with your family when you were a kid?
No. I got started in COVID,
Oh,
four
okay.
years ago.
All right.
Yeah, I had come home. I'd not come home. I was my because my family lives in Hong Kong. I'd
Mhm.
gone to stay with my aunt who lives much closer to where I went to university. And for spring break, and then during spring break, we all got the email, "Don't come back to school because of COVID."
Yep. Hmm.
Uh, so I immediately, like that same day, actually did not listen and got on a plane to go back to get my stuff before everyone else would go back to get their stuff. Um, and so I came back to a deserted campus, quickly got all the things I needed, and was on a plane back to my aunt's place the next day. And then 2 weeks later, my first game was actually a professional game master game,
Hmm.
and it was one of my favorite authors was offering his game master services during the pandemic. So
Oh,
I was like,
cool.
oh, this sounds perfect for me, because I want to be an author, and I know that like publishing is a business, so networking is always good. So I thought this would just be a great way to get to know someone who has some amount of stature in the community.
Right.
And it was great. He's a great game master. We're friends now, and yeah, it was awesome. Um,
Who is this?
this is Dan Wells.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
You know the author Brandon Sanderson?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is his best friend from college, who's now the VP of narrative at his company. So Dan Wells, his own books aren't like super popular, but um, they are very very good. One of them did get turned into a movie, like an indie film, which is cool. But his big thing is that he's a very good businessman. So he's got a lot of connections in a lot of different parts of the industry. He's very well networked. He and of course he works at Dragonsteel now, so he's very competent. He's very well known.
Oh, yeah.
He's also a great friend. I love the guy.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I must know him. I've remembered vaguely from the Sanderson connection who he was.
Yeah,
Well, cool. That's a really neat connection to get from the game. That's nice.
yeah. It definitely is a weird way into the hobby, though. I will agree with it.
I feel like a lot of people do that though more commonly for their first experience with D&D,
Mm.
because it can feel more like you're less worried about someone making fun of you if you're kind of paying them for the experience, right? Like if you do something wrong, I don't know if that's quite what your experience was, but that's how it's sort of seemed when other people have talked about their first experience with a paid DM to me.
That might be right. I think a lot of people also want to be assured that they're going to have like a high quality experience when they go to a paid DM.
Yeah.
So, um, I know that like for me, it was about I wanted to hang out with Dan Wells, who's a very cool author who says very cool things on his podcast, whose books I like reading, who's friends with with a very popular author who I didn't know how else to get in with the industry, so I thought, okay, this might be a way, right? Like those were my reasons. But some of the people I played with, their reasons were I like Dan Wells, and I've always been interested in this hobby and just don't know how to get started. This is probably going to be good, so let me pay for it. And I would not be surprised if that was a lot of people's rationale, because I think now it's obviously sometimes you can get a bad experience even if you pay for it, but often if someone's paying for it, they usually are trying to provide a professional quality service.
Right. And you transitioned, like, were you playing a whole campaign with him, or just like a few adventures?
Yeah, so
sessions?
we played a year of Seventh Sea, so a year-long campaign. We played every week for 2 hours, and then after that, we transitioned from Seventh Sea to Pendragon, where we played for another year there, and then he got the job to work as VP of Narrative in Brandon Sanderson's company, so he had to step down, and we decided to bring on one of his friends, who's another paid DM, to run it for us. But then I graduated college, and I went from being supported by my parents to having to fend a bit for myself.
Yeah.
So
Typical transition.
yeah, and one of my friends in the group moved in with his girlfriend and suddenly had to become a lot more financially responsible. So both of us were no longer able to afford the new paid DM services. Or it's not that we weren't able to afford her, but it would have stretched us a bit to an uncomfortable margin.
Right. Yeah.
So at that point, we parted ways with her amicably, and I took over as a game master of that group. At the same time, I'd been running a separate Pendragon campaign for another group that had started that year. So that was interesting to run both of those at the same time as my first major game master experiences.
Okay. So was that transition for Seventh Sea or Pendragon?
For Pendragon, sorry.
Okay.
Seventh Sea was wrapped up for like 2 years by the time I took over as the game master.
Gotcha. Okay. So the Pendragon campaign, that I guess how far did it go before you took over as the game master?
So with Dan, we went to just to the start of the Anarchy period. So that was about, I think we got to the 19th year of the campaign, starting in 480. And then with the next game master that we got, we only covered about 5 years in game, because like there was just a lot more complex stuff going on at that point in the campaign, so we just ended up slowing down a lot. I took over in the year 502, and we got to 506, and then we had to go on hiatus again because one of the players has had a lot of family commitments this year. But yeah, so we did a lot around 4 or 5 years with me in the campaign, and then recently, so my other campaign that I had started kind of fell apart because the group just all kind of moved on. They're also all like young college age, so things change rapidly.
Right. Yeah.
But I started like a few months ago, started playing a new campaign with more 6th edition oriented materials, and I got a group like online through the Pendragon server and looking for game subreddit. This group hopefully will be a bit more stable, but I also only committed for this group through the start and end of Boy King period, so we're only supposed to do like 10 years.
Okay.
And if we keep going, then we keep going. But I did not pitch it as we're gonna do 66 in-game years.
Yeah, the whole Great Pendragon game.
We can still reach like a satisfying ending after a year of play, and if people want to keep going, we can keep going. But if we don't, then that's also fine. So that's the main thing I'm running right now. That's on Sundays. On Saturdays, the Pendragon is off for now, so I'm playing in another friend's Scion campaign. So that's what I was doing earlier today.
Okay, gotcha. And what's Scion? I don't. That's
So Onyx Path, they have this system called Story Path. It's similar to the White Wolf storytelling system. They actually, I think they made this game together. Story Path is just Onyx Path's version of it. But it's basically one. It basically is like adult Percy Jackson. It takes place in
okay.
the real modern world, except in this version of the real modern world, all mythologies are true. So you have like scions in the media and scions running businesses and stuff like that. And a scion is essentially someone whose parent, like biological or adopted, but whose parent is a god from some mythology. And so you can play any kind of mythology, like Incan mythology, Greek mythology. I'm playing an Egyptian mythology character.
Okay.
And there's like different levels. So you start at origin level, then you progress onto hero, and then in most campaigns you spend the most time at hero, because it's kind of where most of the complexity of the system is. And then there's demigod, and then there's finally god. And god is wild. God is such a weird system, in so many ways.
So is it kind of transition into like exalted levels of power at the end there from that system?
Yeah, it's got this mechanic called scale, where essentially if you have a certain amount of scale on someone, you automatically succeed against them. So I can't remember the exact number, but I think someone like Persephone is like scale 9, and someone like Zeus is scale 12, I think.
Okay.
So I think Zeus automatically succeeds against Persephone. I think he doesn't need to roll because he's just so much higher than her.
Gotcha.
But for player characters, like you always get a chance to roll to try to beat the other guy. So the way that scale also works is that if you do roll with scale, the person who has higher scale just gets a number of automatic successes. And so it's a dice pool system. So they get automatic successes, and then you have to roll enough successes to beat them.
Okay.
So it's really interesting in that way. There's a lot of it's got some cool mechanics to play with scale, to play with mythology, to get into like these really complicated, like magical mythological fights. And we're still at the origin level, but it already feels like it has a lot of potential to grow into that level of play. One of the things my character is doing, this is a side note, but one of the things my character is going to do is he's going to take on the mantle of King Arthur, which is also a thing in the game. So he's going to get
So
to
you're
wield
doing
Excalibur and everything.
Pendragon in your Scion game?
Yeah, my game master who used to play Pendragon with me, he was like, "You just want to play Pendragon in every system, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah."
No, that's cool though. I like that.
Yeah.
And is this as like the second coming or more like some sort of distant relation kind of thing?
It's more like it's kind of like Second Coming. There's a mechanic in the game called mantles. Usually these are completed mantles, so they come with a lot of like bonuses from the person who completed them. But the mantle of Arthur is uniquely an incomplete mantle. So the way it works is that like every person who's taken on the mantle of Arthur tries to be the one who completes it, and every person who's taken it on fails. And there's mechanics surrounding the mantle of Arthur, stuff called fate bindings and stuff. I haven't read that much into it because it's way off in our campaign. But
Gotcha.
like there are all these mechanics surrounding it that are meant to push towards that kind of tragedy drama storytelling. So my game master has been talking about how he's been like designing NPCs that could fit into the role of Guinevere, could fit into the role of Mordred, things like that.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
So you kind of replay the story, and your goal
In
by
some
taking
ways,
the mantle is to be King
just to
Arthur
fulfill
that
it.
succeeds instead
Yeah.
of failing well, I guess not really failing,
Yeah.
but dying in the process.
Yeah. So in some ways it's replaying, but in some ways the game master also gets to mix things up how they wish. So he said one of his goals for me was to keep it familiar enough that I would keep guessing and be really invested because I have all this knowledge of Arthurian legend and Arthurian literature,
Mhm.
but to keep it unfamiliar enough that I would consistently be surprised and not know exactly what's happening.
All right. And are you playing with mostly people in like Asia, India area, or are you playing with people in the U.S.? Or like,
I I think most of the people are in the U.S. I don't think anyone I know is in. So one of my players who I played with previously is in Pakistan,
mhm.
but aside from him, I don't think I play with anyone who's in Asia. So pretty much everyone I play with is in the US or Europe. My game master for Scion is in the UK. So yeah. So and then a lot of the people I play with on Sunday, because it's a bit earlier. Um, it's a bit early for the US, so they're mostly Europeans. But we do
Mhm.
actually have two Americans who just wake up early.
Okay, this is explaining the what seemed like an odd sleep schedule to me.
Well, it's the reverse because I can play this way because my sleep schedule is like this.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Um, yeah, so let's get more into Pendragon because I'm really excited about that. So Pendragon is a role-playing system designed for playing Arthurian King Arthur stories.
Yeah,
And the Pendragon system is like you were mentioning the sixth edition. It's transitioning from fifth to sixth right now, just like
yeah,
sort of D&D is transitioning from fifth to 5.5 or whatever the next one's going to be called. Um, like every successful system gets more additions. So I guess first, why don't you tell us what the sort of outline for the King Arthur story for anyone listening that's not familiar with it?
sure, yeah. So Arthurian legend is it's a tradition of literary entertainment that that was very popular, at least amongst nobility, during the High Middle Ages. Um, and the literature that's been written for it has primarily taken the form of a type of literature called a romance, which is not like love stories. It's these types of verse or prose stories that were called romances for some reason that I actually don't know. I should probably look into that. But it's equivalent to like it was their version of the modern novel. And so they were writing all these stories about the Knights of the Round Table and all that. But essentially, uh, there's one guy who came along in the 15th century to kind of collect it into a cohesive, overarching narrative, to collect all the romances into a cohesive, overarching narrative. And they kind of fit into the structure already. But I'll tell you what his structure was. Um, it starts with um, this tournament in London, where Britain has not been in a state of peace with a king for decades. And they are now holding a tournament to see who can become the new king. There is also a sword struck through an anvil and into a stone in in the courtyard of a cathedral in London, and it says, "Whosoever shall pull this sword shall become High King of all Britain." Um, so obviously, a boy pulls that sword, and uh, this old wizard called Merlin comes out of the woodwork to say he is that boy. He is that king. Sorry. And this boy, his name is Arthur, then goes on to defeat rebel kings who challenge his rule and creates a rule of peace and prosperity over Britain. Um, his soldiers aren't super satisfied with that, and so when the Roman Empire, which somehow exists during the High Middle Ages, comes knocking and saying, "Hey, you should pay tribute to us," Arthur's like,
Well,
you know,
our Arthurian legend is set not during the High Middle Ages, but like during around the fall of the Roman Empire, from my understanding.
well, this is where it gets a little complicated because one of the things about medieval romances is that they were very anachronistic. So some Arthurian stories were set during the High Middle Ages, like The Once and Future King by T.H. White is set during Norman times. And then some Arthurian stories were set during the like during the Dark Ages, right after um, like a century or so after the Romans departed Britain during the Anglo-Saxon invasion. And then some stories are set in the middle. So like right now, I'm actually reading a new Arthurian novel that just came out recently, which is set during the I want to say the seventh century, no, the eighth century
Okay.
AD. Yeah, it really just depends on who you ask.
Yeah, I
Different
guess that's
authors have
true.
different takes on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm used to
But
the Roman one though.
yeah, yeah. I mean, even if it's set during the Dark Ages, like the Romans are supposed to be gone by then.
Yeah, they were
Um,
gone for like 100
and
years from Britain at that point.
yeah. Well, they were also gone from Italy at that point. Like they were replaced by the Lombards and stuff.
Hmm.
But in Mallory's story, Arthur goes and conquers the Roman Empire and becomes Emperor of Rome. And then you have a lot of drama going on with Arthur's best knight Lancelot, who has an affair with his wife Guinevere, and there are tensions between different rival families in Arthur's elite group of knights called the Round Table. These conflicts and tensions in court eventually come to a head and split the empire or split Arthur's kingdom into civil war. Um, and eventually his son, who is a bastard born of accidental incest with his older sister, um, uh, he's the one who leads an army against Arthur, and ultimately everything comes crashing down at the consequential Battle of Camlan, where Arthur is mortally wounded, carried to a lake where Excalibur is thrown back into the lake, and then a barge arrives with ladies on it who escort him to the magical island of Avalon, where he will heal and one day return to become king again. But he still hasn't done that. And yeah, the whole thing is Arthurian stories are not always tragedies, but the grand Arthurian tale is a tragedy, and many of the best stories are tragedies.
Hmm. Yeah, there's so many stories. I think you touched on a lot of the great points. I feel like the two things you missed there, I guess, are like the myth of Camelot and the Holy Grail.
Oh yeah.
Because Camelot, I feel like, is even in like I guess semi-modern as how people referred to JFK's presidency. So it's still used as like a touchstone point for even political discourse in the U.S.
Yeah.
That was the capital that King Arthur built.
Capital of Arthur's kingdom.
Yeah, it was sort of like this. I I don't know. It's supposed to be like sort of clean and aspiring to be like good and knowledgeable instead of functional. Or I'm not quite sure what the right way to put it is.
It was supposed to be Arthur's kingdom was supposed to be an era of justness and civility to contrast with his father's era of might makes right,
Mhm.
and arbitrary pursuits and selfishness and all that.
Yeah, I guess the round table is a symbolic representation of that, where no one is at the head of the table.
I think Arthur was at the head of the table, but oh no, I see what you mean. Yeah, like there isn't a head of the table because it's a circle. Sorry. Yeah. No.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, yes, you can declare that wherever Arthur sits is the head of the table, and
Yeah.
sure. But there's always however people want to write it.
Yeah, it's a fellowship.
Right. And the other big part of Arthurian lore that I'm not sure if Mallory even touched on it in his book, actually, is the Holy Grail.
I can't remember if Mallory touched on it. I haven't finished reading Mallory yet, so
Okay, looks like he
yeah.
did. I'm reading the Wikipedia article now, and it's in book 6.
Yeah, with the Holy Grail, I'm still trying to figure out how to work that into my campaigns because Pendragon has a few differences with like the literature where like in some ways it's very good at recreating literary type stories. In other ways, it's not very good at recreating like stuff like the Holy Grail. So I'm trying to figure out how to make it work. And so sometimes I forget that it's in the game because the current system, both the rules as written and then my house rules, can't accommodate for the Holy Grail just yet.
Well, and I mean, I can kind of even understand it not being because, like, in the actual story, like, don't all 50 knights go looking for it, and then like 10 of them come back, and the other 40 die or something during the quest, and it's just like this fruitless quest for something that's not even necessarily real, I guess.
Yeah, so I think it's actually 150 knights, but yeah, like they all go looking for it, and most of them die. And the campaign does accommodate for this. Like the way that it's set up in the Great Pendragon Campaign is that everyone goes looking for the Holy Grail, and some knights start to return after the first year. and the player knights can be among those knights because there isn't actually a Grail quest in the book. They have they've never designed a proper Grail quest. All that they've designed are some encounters while you're looking for the Grail, and then you come back home and you do the real story, um, which is yeah.
I mean, that's fitting with what it is, right?
Yeah, well, and then NPCs go and achieve the Holy Grail. So I sometimes forget about the Holy Grail because it's just so peripheral to the campaign. And NPCs are supposed to achieve it, and there's just not a lot of focus in it from the Pendragon system. I know that in 6th edition they're planning to design one, but like they're probably not going to release that for like 6 years at least.
Yeah, you'd have to have some funky stats to succeed from how Pendragon is structured and the way the myth is told.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to talk about Pendragon as a system also. I guess I wanted to start at like character creation for Pendragon because it has a
Mhm.
unique way of doing stats where it's more like a hourglass, I guess I want to say.
Yeah, so when you create your player knight, the the focus immediately in the character creation section is on it's on family, it's on culture, it's on your character's role in society, because these are often the things about the characters that really define them in this game. So like one of the first things you see is how do you is calculating your parents' glory, and once you have their glory, you do a quick history by just making some random rolls on a heroic events table to see what events they were involved in. This is something I really like about Pendragon. Um, it starts character creation by reminding you that you are not going to just be playing one character over the course of the campaign. Pendragon is a game of generations. You play through 3 to 5 generations of a family, depending on whether you start with 510 or 480. 480 is the start in 5th edition, and 510 is the start in 6th edition. The archetypal way to play is like you play as a character during Arthur's early years, and he dies, and you play as his son, and then he dies, and then you play as his son, and you play those 3 characters. In practice, like the sons are not old enough by the time your first character dies, so you often play like a younger brother first before moving on to the son.
I have heard that, yes.
Yeah, the goal of character creation is to focus on the family first and your role in it, where you stand, all of that. Once you have that, it moves on to select your character's culture. There's a number of cultures in the game. In my house rules, I've developed a bunch of different cultures for 6th edition, based on the 5th edition cultures, and then based on what I think the culture should be in the new edition. But basically, based on your culture, you get bonuses to certain characteristics and certain skills.
And the cultures are like the Britain, Saxon, Scott
Yeah,
kind of thing.
exactly. Yeah, so there's Kimric, which is like the main, like it's basically England, and then there's different variations of Kimric based on region. So if you're from Wales, which is called Cambria in this, then you get the Cambrian archetype, which is a little different. If you're from Cumbria, which I guess is like northern England, then you get slightly different bonuses, things like that. Cornwall as well, I give separately in my own game. I don't know if they're going to do that in 6th edition, but I think they will because it is pretty different in this period. And then yeah, there's Pictish, there's Irish, there's Aquitanian. One of the things I know they're doing is in 6th edition they want to have every culture whose story is part of medieval Europe to be part of the game. So this could be as far flung as like the Slavs or stuff like that. It gets a little wonky when you go to looking at like Middle Eastern people because they obviously were involved through the Byzantine Empire and stuff like that. So there, like, it's a conversation like, do we represent them all accurately or do we represent them as the medievals thought of them, which is to call them Saracens.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Palamedes. Yeah.
Yeah. So they went with the Saracen approach, which is fine, and it's very easy to house rule if you want to represent all those cultures. They did do something differently for Northern Africa. There's a romance where Northern Africa is ruled by an empire called the Zazamonk Empire, which is this powerful North African kingdom. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, so it's very cool. And I think they're working really hard to try to get all the European cultures in this. Like they're going to have Danes, they're going to have Geats, they're going to have Jutes, they're going to have, all those guys from Beowulf in the game.
All right.
They're probably gonna have Lombards and Vandals and all those Germanic groups. So it's gonna be really interesting to see what they come up with. I just wish they'd release things a little faster, or tell us when they plan to release things.
Or do like some sort of test realm thing, like the Unearthed Arcana that D&D does.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, once you've got your culture, you then select your characteristics. So this is size, dexterity, strength, constitution, appeal. Then these 5 characteristics affect secondary characteristics. So for example, your size is also your knockdown value. If you take damage in excess of your size, then you have to make a dexterity roll to see if you fall. And if you're on a horse, you might fall off your horse and take extra damage.
So all the characteristics seem like these are explicitly physical compared to other systems that kind of have them lumped separately together for physical versus mental.
Yeah, well, then after you do those characteristics, there's also your personality trait. And this is kind of Pendragon's like core mechanic.
Yeah, this is the hourglass thing I was talking about.
Oh, yeah. So it's got 13 pairs of virtues and vices. So there's chaste versus lustful, energetic versus lazy, forgiving versus vengeful, etc. And the way that dice rolling in this game works is you roll a d20 and you're trying to roll equal to or under the statistic value. So as a quick example, if let's say your just personality trait is a 13, then you are trying to roll a 13 or under to succeed. A 13 is a critical success in this game. Rolling the same number as the value, as the statistic, is a critical success in this game.
Yeah, I guess
and then rolling a 20 is a fumble, which is very anti-D&D.
I mean, plenty of other systems do the roll under thing. D&D used to, actually.
I guess it's the 20 being a fumble.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so a 20 is a fumble in this game, unless you can actually get, like, you're more likely to do this with a skill, but you can get statistics over 20, in which case you can no longer fail. It is possible to stop failing in this game, which I love, because 20 becomes a critical success. So the way that critical successes work is that if you roll a crit, even if you've got like a skill of 10, it counts as a successful result of 20. So once you have a skill of 20 or higher, any result of 20 or 20 or higher is a critical success. If you've got a skill of like 22, that 2 at the end adds to your roll. So your 1s become 3s, your 5s become 7s, and your 18, 19, and 20s all become crits because they all reach 20 and over.
Okay.
So with personality traits, with these pairings of virtues and vices, as one side goes up, the other side goes down. So if you're just versus arbitrary, if you've got 13 in just and 7 in arbitrary, and then you gain a point of arbitrary, and so it goes up to 8, then your just goes down to 12. And this is one of the core mechanics of the game. If you've got something at 16 or higher, it's a dominant personality trait, so you have to act that way most of the time. The only way to not act that way, if given a choice, is to roll against the famous personality trait, the 16, and fail it. So if you've got just 16, but you want to act in an arbitrary way, then you have to fail a roll of just to do that. Moreover, sometimes these traits might be invoked if you have to like resist something. So a very common one is you're at a feast and there's wine being passed around. So there's a trait pair called temperate versus indulgent. So you would roll temperate to try to resist drinking if you don't want to drink, or you would roll indulgent to see if you're able to get drunk. And similar,
Okay.
like you can have like tests like that across the traits. And there's actually mechanics for getting drunk. It's awesome. I love this game. Then there's passions. Passions represent your motivations in the game. So a very simple example is love of family. If you have a higher love of family, it doesn't mean you love your family more or less. It means that it is more of a dominant motivation in your personality. So under fervor, you can also have like love wife or hate Saxons. And it might be that you love your family a lot, but it's not a dominant motivation in your personality. Your dominant motivation might be your hatred of Saxons. And so that is what drives you most of the time. And so what these motivations do, what these passions do, is you can roll against them to get bonuses on skill rolls. So if you're in combat against a Saxon, you can roll hate Saxons to get a +5 on your skill roll, and to try to have a better chance of defeating the Saxon you're fighting.
All right.
And then finally, there are skills. There's a collection of non-combat skills and combat skills. Combat skills are divided into the type of skill, so it's less often like different types of swords, but more just a general sword skill. Or even a better example is there's just a hafted skill, which applies to maces and axes and other weapons that have a haft.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's your non-combat skills like courtesy, orate, literacy, intrigue. These are just some of the more used ones that I'm listing off. But yeah, that's kind of the system in a nutshell. D20 roll the same number to get a crit. Roll a 20 to get a fumble, but if your value is 20 or higher, then a 20 is a crit. You can't fail or fumble. Yeah, it's pretty neat. One of the things that drew me to it is that it had more failure than Seventh Sea, but it also had the ability to get rid of failure. So I liked having both those things in the game.
So if I wanted to like hit another knight, I might roll like Valorous plus my sword skill. Is that how it works?
No. So you don't add those together.
Okay.
The personality traits are for behavior, but your abilities are just skill rolls. So if you are, let's say you're with a sword skill of 16, and you're fighting me who has a sword skill of like, let's say 19.
Okay.
So you will roll a d20 against 16, and I will roll a d20 against 19. And it's resolved simultaneously. So it's not you go first, then I go. We go at the same time.
Okay.
And whoever has the higher result hits the other. Now, if let's say I roll a 1 and you roll a 10, this means that you hit me. However, because I still succeeded, I actually get to protect myself with shield protection. So that the way that armor works in this game is that it works as damage reduction rather than as armor class like in D&D.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So normally armor, like the default starting armor is 10 points of armor. So if you do 12 damage, then that would be reduced by 10 points. So only 2 would go through and actually hit me. But if I have a shield, I get an additional 6 points of protection. So then 12 damage wouldn't do anything to me because I block all of them.
Okay.
Unless I have a size of less than 12, because then there's all the knockdown effects.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I had rolled a 17, then I would have missed because that's over my 16. And your 1,
Yes.
which is obviously under your 19, would hit. So then I would not get to raise my shield and you would hit me.
Correct.
Okay.
You get a shield on a partial success, but not on a failure.
Okay.
Now, what you might decide to do is, let's say I'm a Saxon, you might decide to roll against your hate Saxons. Let's say your hate Saxons is 15, you roll a 12. So you now become what's called inspired. So you get a +5 bonus to any one skill. You can put that on your sword, and you can raise it to 21. Now suddenly, let's say you roll a 19, well, you get a +1 from having a 21. And so that becomes a 20, which means you just rolled a crit. You're able to hit me for extra damage. So let's say you roll your damage dice. Maybe your damage dice are 5d6. You then get to roll 4 extra d6s on top of that in the same hit.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. In the old edition, it was just double damage, which was even more brutal. They wanted to tone it down mostly because of monsters, because it makes monsters really tough.
Uh-huh. Gotcha.
But yeah, so you're able to hit me for extra damage, which probably causes me a major wound, or at least it knocks me down. And all these things activate different effects, because if you knock someone down, then you get a a height modifier. You have the high ground now, and yeah, so there's a lot of different things going on. The way the traits would be used is that if you're in combat and you come up against a really fearsome opponent, like someone who's wearing like war paint and has like 5,000 more glory than you, then the game master might say, in order to face this guy, you need to pass a valorous roll.
I see.
So you roll valorous, you succeed, you can fight. You fail, you run away.
Okay, so the traits are more like whenever what action you're going to take comes into question, then you roll your traits.
Yeah, it's kind of like the way I think of it is that it's a cap on player agency.
Okay.
it's not meant to take away player agency, but it's meant to say sometimes real people don't act the way we want them to. And uh, and so it's meant to it doesn't like necessarily limit you. You can also, by the way, inspire traits if you want to act more in a certain way. But the way that it works is that it tells you things about your character that you didn't know. It has your character operate in a way that makes sense for the game world. Someone like Lancelot has a valorous of like over 20, which is possible. So he's got a cowardly of 0, so he doesn't back away from things. Most knights have a valorous of like 15 or 16, so sometimes they will back away from things because they're reasonable people who don't want to die.
Yeah, I'll bet Lancelot has a low chaste score.
Yeah.
Knowing that story. Okay. I was gonna ask. My understanding of like knightly combat from King Arthur's stories is that there's this progression from like mounted with lances to swords to then eventually kind of like brawling on the ground while still wearing armor in the mud kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You mentioned knockdown as like you have your knockdown stat based off of your size. Is there a natural progression of the combat in that way, or is that kind of not quite supported by the system?
So it can be. I think that some of the more dramatic combats I've seen actually have progressed that way. So I remember one time I was running a battle against the Picts, and the players rolled and got this opportunity to face the enemy Pictish commander. And one of the players wanted to be the one who fights the commander, while the others fight his bodyguards. So everyone else defeats the bodyguards, but the player and the commander have the craziest fight where they are both on horseback at first, but then the commander gets knocked off his horse and onto and has to fight on foot. But then the commander gets a crit and he knocks the player off his horse. And then they both proceed to take turns fumbling and dropping their swords. And finally they're brawling in the ground with daggers. So I have actually seen that. Like the thing you are describing, I have seen. It is not common. Most of the time, fights end when one side gets a crit. So this more represents, there's a famous story about Lancelot where he is going to rescue Guinevere who's been captured, kidnapped. And the guy who kidnapped her is willing to let her go. But Lancelot is enraged at the insults to the woman he loves and champions. So he challenges the guy to a duel. The guy knows Lancelot's reputation. He refuses because he's a coward. And Lancelot's like, look, dude, how about this? I will fight you with one hand tied behind my back and while balanced on only one leg. And the guy's like, oh, I should be able to beat him like that. He's just on one leg. He's fighting with only one hand. It should be easy. And Lancelot kills him in a single blow. So a lot of Pendragon combat does end in a single blow like that, which also happens in the literature. But it sometimes supports what you're saying, but more often combats are over quickly. Because the part that it really wants to focus on is you've captured the Prince of Garloth. What are you going to do with him? Mm-hmm. Right? Like it wants to ask those kinds of questions. It wants to direct the tension of the story back to players looking at their traits and passions. Not always is it going to come down to a roll of traits and passions, because oftentimes it's very interesting to see which trait does the player want to take a check in, right? Like if you decide to let the Prince of Garloth go without asking for ransom, then you might get a check in generous. If you decide to execute him, you might get a check in vengeful and cruel. If you decide to ransom him off, that actually might be just, not selfish, because that's just what you're supposed to do, right? So it really depends on like what is what kind of characters does the player want their character to become. Mm-hmm. It's not really a problem-solving game in the same way that other games are. Like a lot of problems in this game you're presented with are moral and ethical dilemmas, not like defeat the monster or get rid of the bandits. Like it has that too, but then it's like, what are you going to do with them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the generational play really brings that out as well, because Yeah, your character could die, but there isn't like a huge punishment for that. Like you can still play almost the same person as a brother or a son or an uncle or whatever.
Well, you can, but I always encourage my players to play someone very different who's affected by the death.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
so
that's fair
I
too.
think it's more like I personally now I know different players are different, and it's fine if you want to play someone who's very similar to your last character. It's a fully valid way to play. But I always encourage my players to pick someone who's different from their first character in a notable way. So like one of my players, the one who had those family commitments, so he had to take basically the whole year off playing. His first character um, was someone who was very like chivalrous type during the time of King Uther, when things are very might makes right. And he got into this messy love triangle with a lord, and he ended up and the lord ended up marrying the woman he loves, and the woman he loves was then abused, and so she asked him to murder the lord, and so the player like found the lord, tracked him down in an alleyway, and just killed him there, which was a wild story for him. But then his character like died 2 years later, and the next character he played, who he's still playing, this next character has survived a long time because he has a very different focus. His famous trait is prudent, so he's a very careful man. This doesn't mean he's not active; he's very active, but he makes every decision knowing that he's going to come out on top. So he's much more of a schemer. He's much more of an intrigue guy. Yeah, it's just been very interesting to see him play these two different characters. The character he's playing right now is the best friend of the first character, so he's very much affected by that man's death, and very much even when like the anarchy period calls on him to be more conniving, more villainous, really, he very much tries his best to live up to the ideals that his best friend would have wanted him to live up to. So like that is, I think, the kind of interesting storytelling the generational system leads itself to.
Yeah, it is like a lot of narrative games, I feel like generally try to give a lot of player agency uh,
Yeah.
with the DM reinforcing that. And then Pendragon goes a different way as a narrative game by, like you said, putting sort of caps on player agency where, you're playing this type of character. It's what you decided.
Yeah.
So here's how you do that, is by, okay, so you have more trusting than suspicious. So the creepy snake oil salesman comes in and you're going to buy the snake oil because that's what your character would do. Whereas
Yeah.
your player, you as a player, understand this is a creepy snake oil salesman.
Yeah. Now sometimes what I would allow in situations like that is I'd allow the player to make an intrigue roll, and on a critical success, I'd give them a bonus to their suspicious roll. Because there are examples like that in the adventures. Um,
Hmm.
but I've seen one description from someone else that I really like, which I'll share with you here as well. But then there's also a description that I like to use as well. So I'll share both of these with you. One of my friends described Pendragon as Pendragon is very much about like it very much wants to encourage a play to win mentality with its focus on glory and stuff like that.
Hmm.
It's very good at encouraging players to chase after riskier and riskier deeds to try to get more glory and become more famous. It's fundamental like game mechanism, in my opinion. Different game masters would disagree or agree with caveats or whatever, but in my opinion, its fundamental foundation is take bigger risks and get bigger rewards, specifically regarding glory. And the pursuit of glory is the goal of the game, as designed. You are trying to get this number higher that represents how famous you are. And becoming famous is something that all knights want. Arthur wants to be famous. Uther wants to be famous. Lancelot wants to be famous. All these knights, all these kings, everyone, even the good ones, want to be famous. They want to be well known. And in the pursuit of glory, you interact with these moral and ethical problems. This is why you sometimes are tempted to be selfish, sometimes are tempted to be proud, because these things can enhance your glory even as they make you a worse person. But sometimes you might sacrifice those things in order to be a better person.
This is the Uther versus Arthur right there.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a lot of where the tension of the system falls. Play to win mentality, but what might you be tempted to do to win? Then there's the other thing. Then there's my sort of way of looking at it, which is that it's a simulationist system, and that's very different from storytelling engine type games like Powered by the Apocalypse games, where they're not actually simulating personalities. Their mechanics revolve around genre tropes. So you
Yeah.
just do what you want as a player. You have full, complete player agency. But when you run into a genre trope, then you roll. And you roll to see how the fiction is affected by your actions. But usually your own actions are not affected. So you still have control over your character, but you don't necessarily have control over their effects on the world. Whereas in Pendragon, you don't have full control over your character because the mechanics simulate your character's personality. And necessarily in a simulationist system, sometimes you fail. Whereas in a Powered by the Apocalypse system, it doesn't quite always work like that. Which is to say, this is kind of the space where I feel like Pendragon falls, where it's very much trying to be more in the traditional types of games in its structure and its paradigms, but it has a lot of these newer ideas on how to create stories, but does so in a way that still sticks to simulationist and gamist principles, which is why I think a lot of people are drawn to this system over Powered by the Apocalypse games, and also why a lot of people are drawn to Powered by the Apocalypse games over this system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this system can give you a lot of drama and storytelling without going into the writer's room approach of Powered by the Apocalypse or Fate or anything like that. But a lot of people want that approach.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, that's very long spiel, but
No, I think it's an important difference. Yeah, that's good. Let's see here. Oh yeah. One of the sort of obvious questions here. Pendragon, is there a way to play a woman in the campaign?
yeah. So there's a couple different ways. The first is that you can just play a female knight. So in 5th edition, these were not included in 5th edition earlier, actually. These were not included in like the default assumptions. But at least 5th edition, I can't speak to earlier editions, but at least 5th edition had a section on playing female knights and how to go about doing it, but it was very small. In 6th edition, they've changed it to knights and courtiers because they basically set up the default to be a relatively egalitarian society relative to medieval society, really. So in 6th edition, if you look at the starter set, the pre-generated characters for the starter set include, I think, 3 female knights and 5 male knights. In the default, they're considered an equal part of the setting. I don't know to what extent they're going to do that once they start releasing more like setting information in the forthcoming books, because the gender divide is kind of important to the story of the campaign. But for the starter set, at least it makes sense. For the player's handbook, it makes sense, which is what the core rulebook is basically just a player's handbook. But we'll see where they go from here. But then the other way, of course, is to play a courtier. Now, I don't think that in past editions courtiers have been well integrated. I think they've been kind of tacked on, and their systems require a lot more work from the game master side to make it work, especially if you have a mixed party of knights and courtiers versus just like a full courtier party. And of course, there's like no adventures and scenarios written for courtiers. There's only stuff written for knights. So if you ever want to use an adventure and you want to put like a lady in it, it's very hard. But I know that in 6th edition, they're working a lot more on integrating these. One of the guys who works on the game, Jeff Irwin, he's very, very passionate about having ladies be a bigger part of the campaign, a bigger part of the system. And I think he's the one who's working on the Book of Courtiers, or it might even be called the Book of Ladies or something. I know that playing a non-knightly woman, and in general, even a non-knightly man, is going to be a much bigger part of the system. I believe that the 4 character types that they're focusing on are knights, courtiers, saints, and magicians. And saints are basically the Christian version of magician as far as Pendragon terminology goes. But yeah, so those are the 4 character types I think they're focusing on. Basically 4 classes. But knights are always going to be like the default setup. So it's very good that in 6th edition they're making more of an effort to just have like women knights.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I guess I was curious about that because like on one hand, yeah, it's not really like in keeping with what the stories were originally, but on the other hand, hey, let us have fun with the game, doing what we want.
and like it doesn't really make a huge difference until you get to the end of the campaign, where like Guinevere is being, all the stuff that Guinevere gets into.
Well, I think the main difference would be pregnancy and how that changes things, and like early child
So,
rearing for female characters.
so I think the way that I run female knights is probably the way that they're going to go with it, which is that we hand wave pregnancy and it say that it doesn't affect the adventures, and then we say that child rearing is done mostly by servants, and that's basically how it works. So we do have like now I leave it up to my players who are playing female knights to decide how much they want to engage with that stuff. Some just want to play a female knight who is just doing all the same knightly things, but they just want to play a female character, which is fine. And some want to get a little bit more involved with that stuff. Like they want to say, I'm carrying my baby to the feast, and that's fine as well. So I leave it up to the players in that case. But for the most part, we don't really have it affect the adventures, because it doesn't really need to. We just kind of hand wave it. By the way, I think I didn't mention this earlier. The way that the Pendragon campaign works is that you usually do one scenario per in-game year. So for the year 510, you'll do one scenario. For the year 511, you'll do one scenario. Usually these take one session. Sometimes they take more. So 510 usually takes 2 to 3 sessions for most groups to complete. I tend to actually, I have a very like house rules driven game. I have a lot of changes I've made to the system. And so one of the things I've done is I usually run 2 to 3 scenarios per year. So I run it a little differently because I have a particular vision for the game that I like to achieve. But yeah, that's kind of the default setup.
Okay. Yeah, that's a reasonable take on it. Well, yeah, let's talk about like the sort of yearly setup for adventures in Pendragon. So you have like you start in the spring for, okay, we're gonna do XYZ, and those are things that do the players control that, or are you throwing something at them as a game master? How does that work?
So there's no official like setup for it that I know of. Different game masters just do it differently. What I've seen be common is that in the spring there's a feast of some kind, which is where like all the big courtly stuff at the start of the year happens. And the summer is the main adventuring of the year, so there might be a battle. There might be like might go into a magical forest to look for something. Like it could be whatever. And in the autumn you come home and you might deal with local problems, or you might go back to royal court to discuss things with people there. And then in the winter you do the winter phase, which is upgrading your skills, doing some kind of personal solo event, and if you have land holdings, then doing land holding management and all that. Again, different game masters run it differently. So like I know one game master always has the year start with every player defining a vignette for their character, some kind of like little scene of something their character is doing.
Okay.
I know that one game master I played with, like he always liked starting with the scenario in media res. So we would usually actually start with the adventure itself, and then a feast would come up somewhere in the like after the high action was down. Then we'd go to a feast later. So that was his way of running things. He didn't like feasts that much, to be fair. He wanted to get to the adventure. And then the feasts he would usually use as like a breather between two adventure sections of the scenario. Then I know that like my first GM, Dan, he would just always have a feast at the start of every year because we loved feasts and he loved feasts. So it just really varies based on game master. I have been doing fewer feasts recently, been more into the in media res style, more into vignettes, that kind of thing, because I've found the feast system is starting to get a little old for me after having done it so many times.
Yeah.
Like, I should mention the feasts are a mini game. They are you go to a feast and you have like certain rounds, and every round you get to choose from a number of a few actions: gossip, flirt, indulge, game, or you can draw a card. And there's this whole deck of cards that has like full feast events. So I have all these cards uploaded to Roll20, and we shuffle them and you draw one. So here's one, which is Lost Love. A weeping knight bemoans his lost love. you have to do a merciful versus cruel roll. If you succeed on merciful, you join him in his lament to the exclusion of all else. You get a point of geniality, which is a meta currency you track that over the course of the feast that indicates how much people are liking you during this feast. So you get a point of geniality, but you suffer -5 to courtesy, dancing, flirting, and orate rolls next round because you are joining him in a lament to the exclusion of all else. If cruel wins, you mock his loss and he leaves the feast. Others look on in pity and you lose 2 points of geniality. And there's no middle ground. I mean, there is a middle ground if you fail both. But in general, you will probably succeed on one or the other, or one will beat the other.
What happens if you succeed on both?
If you succeed on both, it's the one that's higher that wins.
Okay. I was thinking I'd go over and join him, and then I make fun of him and kick him out.
No. So, like, if merciful is 10 and cruel is 10, and you roll a 9 on merciful and an 8 on cruel, then you're merciful. And
Gotcha.
if you roll a 9 on cruel and 8 on merciful, then you're cruel. So this is something that's good because these feast cards naturally kind of spin out into their own dramas, right? Like, imagine if cruel wins, but the guy you were cruel to was Mordred. That is a very big deal.
Yeah.
Right? Or if it was Sir Agravain, Gawain's younger brother, and Gawain is known to be fiercely protective of his brothers, to the point of like killing people over them, right? Like, depending on who it is, you want to be careful. Even if it's someone who's not from a famous family, like, or not a famous character, it could be quite risky. It could spin out into its own drama that could last sessions upon sessions. So actually, here's a great example. There is a feast card where the host of the feast basically offers you a wife. He says, I want to hook you up with this woman, and I want you guys to get married. I was running a duet campaign at one point where I had a lot more time than I do now, and my player was having an affair with the marshal's daughter. They were like secretly hooking up, and she'd given birth to 2 of his bastard children at that point. And during the feast, he first got a card where he had to give a speech. Like the host, who was the High King of Britain, called on him specifically to give a speech. So he gave a speech, and it was a really nice story. He got a critical success on the story, and everyone loved him. The king loved him. And then the next round, he drew the card where the king is offering him a wife. So we were like, oh, the king was so impressed by your speech that he decides to reward you with a rich and glorious wife. So I go to the book of the Entourage, which has random wife tables. This game is really funny sometimes. So it's got these random wife tables. I went to Widow of a Rich Vassal Knight, which is, if you look under the Household Knight column, it's 19. And then in the Vassal Knight column, it's 17. Under Rich Vassal, it's 15. Right? So I went to Widow of a Rich Vassal Knight, and I offered him that one, and I gave her something like 4,000 glory, because she's a widow, so she's got a lot more glory now. And so suddenly, he has to choose between his rich, glorious woman offered by the High King of Britain, or the woman who he loves, who's given birth to 2 of his kids, but has like no glory or wealth. And he didn't know what to do.
It's funny, like this table is just describing like their money and their land and nothing else.
Well, yeah. So the other parts, this is actually important, an important bit. Like the money and land is the thing that game masters need the most help with usually. So having a random wife table to figure out like what level of reward the player gets, I think is really valuable. I actually think you don't need the personality creation because I can do that myself. This stuff I struggle with a little bit more. So this is what I actually need as a game master. This is one of my favorite tools in the entire system because it really helps with marriage. And I use this, by the way, like if a female knight wants to marry a male courtier, I use this for them as well. It's just that in 5th edition, it was assumed that all knights were men and all courtiers were women. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's set up this way.
Gotcha.
But in 6th edition, hopefully they'll remake this table so it's less patriarchal.
I mean, it's easy enough to do a gender swap on this, and it just becomes instead of you get your power through a widow, instead it's just that person's power based off of like their.
Well, even male knights can be, even male characters can be widowed. So
yeah, it's just usually you're not inheriting like your wealth through that system.
Oh yeah,
which is kind of the implied thing.
But
here.
Regardless, it's kind of like if it's gender neutral. But regardless, so he was in that situation. And he had no idea what to do because he was like, I want the money and glory, but I feel like such a dick doing that. So what he did was, and this is one of the things Pendragon is best at, he made a roll himself without me calling for it. He decided to roll his love for his lover against his loyalty for his king. And he said, if the loyalty king wins, I'll pick the new wife. If the love for the lover wins, I'll pick her. So he rolled, and the love for the lover was much higher. It was like a 14, and the loyalty for the king was like a 7. But the love for the lover failed, and the loyalty for the king succeeded. We did not see this coming. It was an amazing moment. And he picked the rich wife, and they got married. And he went to the lover and was like, "We're gonna end this because I'm getting married." And she's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" I think that was my one F-bomb I get to use.
Good job.
And so he got married to her, and everything was fine and dandy until she started protesting because he wasn't letting her see the kids. And so he finally had to go to her dad and tell her, "I don't want her to see the kids anymore." And her dad, the marshal, we did a roll for this. So I've started using reaction rolls with a 2d6, where like the average is 7, so that just kind of means neutral. But a high roll means that they don't like you, and a low roll means they like you. So he rolled snake eyes. So he was like, "Yeah, dude, totally. I think that she needs to get the hell over you. She made a bad choice, and now we will be able to get her married to someone good if she's not burdened with the kids anymore." So then the player knight went to her and was like, "Look, you need to not see the kids anymore. It's the only way to get over me." And he left. And it was like
Cold.
like all of that came out of it. All of that came out of 2 feast cards, right? Like that huge, like this thing lasted like 2 sessions. It came out of just a couple feast cards, which was crazy for us. And that's kind of the power of the feast system. It can create these really interesting stories that carry on long after the feast because of the people that you're interacting with. And yeah, I just love it for that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, no, I love the emergent storytelling that creates. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, people are used to that in D&D from sort of like tough combat encounters, and it's interesting to have it be more like, no, here's a sort of tough social problem to deal with.
Exactly. It's emergent storytelling focused on the drama and heartache inherent to Arthurian stories.
Yeah, and I feel like a part that you even overlooked there is turning down the High King's like sort of gift of this valuable wife that has this own consequence itself for like your relationship with the High King.
Yeah. Although to be fair, the High King dies the next year. So
Okay. Well,
yeah.
no long-term consequence there, but how would you know?
Yeah. Exactly. And you know what? Probably if that's what would have happened, I probably would have had something bad happen to the player that year before the High King's death. So it still probably would have affected him.
He curses you with his dying breath.
Exactly.
So one of the other things I was curious about for Pendragon was the treatment of religion and sort of magic and monsters within the setting.
Mm-hmm.
So religion, like you've got sort of pagan versus Christianity for the most part, is my understanding of it.
Yeah, so I'll start with the religion aspect of it. Greg Stafford, the designer, very clearly said that he wants religion to inform the characters' lives, but he does not want religious conflict in the game. The game is not about religious conflict. The stories are not about religious conflict. So religion is there. It affects your character's personality traits like character generation, and it affects certain ideals, which I'll get to describing that. But one of the major things is it does not cause conflict. Now, you as a game master can make it cause conflict, and that's fine if that's the kind of game you want to run. The system is very flexible to allow for that, but the default setup is religion doesn't cause conflict in the game. Now, the slight exception might be the Saxon religion, which is very violent. But even there, I say it's because of the people, not because of the religion that's causing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Now, you get bonuses to your traits based on your religion. In 6th edition, there are 3 major religions. There's Christian, pagan, and Wodinic. Wodinic is the Saxon religion.
That's Woden, like Odin, right?
Odin, yeah. So the Christian, if you are Christian, then on character generation, you get a +3 to these 6 traits: chaste, forgiving, merciful, modest, spiritual, and temperate. If you're a pagan, at character generation, you get +3 to these 6 traits: energetic, generous, honest, lustful, proud, and spiritual. And if you're Wodinic, then you get a +3 to generous, indulgent, proud, reckless, valorous, and worldly. And so basically it means that if these normally start at 10, then the ones you get these in are at 13s and their opposite traits are 7. There's 3 of what's called ideals in the game. Ideals are basically archetypal knights. These are called chivalrous, the religious knight, and the romantic knight. In previous editions, there wasn't a romantic knight. They added that this edition. But the chivalrous knight, the way you qualify for it is that you have 96 points among the 6 chivalrous traits, which are energetic, generous, just, merciful, modest, and valorous. Religious knight means you have 16 points or higher in all 6 religious traits. So it's even harder because you can't get 20 points in one and then 12 points in the other. You have to have 16 in all of them. So if you want to be a religious Christian, then you need to have a 16 or higher in chaste, forgiving, merciful, modest, spiritual, and temperate. So it is very tricky to achieve. And then for a romantic knight, you need to have 90 traits between the 6 romantic traits to qualify, which are chaste, generous, honest, modest, spiritual, and temperate. So you need to have 90 points between all 6 of them, which means an average of 15. And so that's where religion comes into play. It affects your character because in their upbringing they would have been affected by faith. It affects your character if they want to be a religious knight. It gives them a direction to go in. And one of the other ways in which I use it, other game masters don't always do this, but one of the ways in which I use it is I use it to give community to the player knights. So I often have events at not just Christmas court, but also the feast of Saint Stephen, or things like that. I'm forgetting other examples.
Saturnalia would be the sort of
for pagan, yeah. Or there's May Day for pagans. There's a few others. So I would focus on that stuff for the pagans. And so in doing this, I can give them community and I can give them some more connections, and it just makes the game world richer. It's not required by any means. A lot of game masters don't do it. Most game masters I know just basically ignore religion until the Grail quest. So it's not really a big deal.
So you mentioned the ideal knights as how religion comes in as you exemplify these religious traits. What is the reward for becoming those ideals though? Is it some glory thing or yeah?
Yeah. So if you're a chivalrous knight, you get the magical. You get a special passion called the chivalry passion. So it's just an extra passion that you can use to inspire in various situations. You also get special armor. So a chivalrous knight gets 4 extra points of magical armor protection, which acts as very armor to block all damage, even that which normally bypass armor, such as falls, fires, and so on. So it's really good.
My faith is my armor. All right.
No, this is for chivalry. This is not for religion.
Oh, okay.
We'll get to religion.
All right.
Yeah. So if you're chivalrous, then you get magical armor. And then on top of that, you get 150 passive glory every year. So you just get 150 glory every winter phase.
Oh, cool.
Which is a lot of points. Normally doing something heroic is worth 100 glory. So it's a lot of points. I actually think I cut this down to just 100, but in my house rules. But yeah, it's a lot. You also get protection from magic and miracles. So magic is pagan magic, miracles is Christian magic. A chivalrous knight can roll against their chivalry passion, and a success or a critical success grants complete immunity from any supernatural effects that would cause them to directly violate a tenet of chivalry. Then religious knights, they get different bonuses based on what religion you're looking at. So Christians get 4 extra hit points, pagans get 2 extra damage and get to deal 2 extra damage and heal by 2 extra points. Heathens get extra movement and extra healing rate. And you get a devotion, deity, passion to inspire on. You get 100 passive glory every year, and you also get protection from magic and miracles. Then romantic knights, they get extra geniality at feasts. They double glory rewards at tournaments if they wear the favor of their beloved.
Oh, cool.
And they also get protection from magic and mirrors. There's a lot of protection from magic.
Okay. I mean, that's a strong motivator right there.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I've done in my game is I've created a bunch more ideals. So I've got things like the Leal Knight, someone who's very loyal to their lord. I've got the Mighty Knight, someone who believes that knighthood is a path to strength, not to virtue. So I've got a bunch more of these because I just think that there's a lot more archetypes in the system, and I wanted to also have some negative ones, or not negative, but like not purely positive ones. So I enjoy those as well. Some game masters I know have actually used some of my ideals.
Oh, cool.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's nice to have your work being used by other people like that.
Yeah, I'll be honest. My friend did most of the work in creating these, but I'm the one who's actually used them. And I've
you did the
refined them a
play
little bit
testing.
to play. Yeah, and I've edited them enough to the point where they're now mine. But he did a lot of the initial work and initial conception.
Okay, well, together. And I was also going to ask about monsters, because you mentioned magic a bit there. So monsters, like you got ogres and giants and dragons in this?
Yeah, so there's the first thing I'll say is that the 5th edition bestiary from the core rulebook is available online for free while they're still getting out the Game Master's book. So if you want to run like monsters and Pendragon and stuff like that, like you can just use the 5th edition stats. And don't worry about balance because they weren't balanced for 5th edition either.
Okay.
But yeah, they've got giants. There's 3 different types of giants. They only have stats for a small dragon, but mostly because people will never even really use that one. They have manticores and stuff like that. And the bestiary in the 5th edition rulebook really focuses on non-fairy creatures. And then if you want fairy creatures and stuff like that, you get those in the Great Pendragon Campaign book. So the Great Pendragon Campaign book has a lot longer of a bestiary. It's got a lot of different fae options. That's what it mostly focuses on. But it's got a few other things like ogres and stuff. Most of them have like some kind of special ability that makes them unique, and they tend to be very strong.
Okay. But they still kind of function the same way as the characters do with like the size, dex, strength, con, appeal kind of thing.
Sometimes they do, when it makes sense, but usually they don't have appeal.
Okay.
They do usually have size, strength, and everything, but their derived characteristics, which is like knockdown, well, knockdown is done the same, but like damage, for example, those are calculated differently. I don't know the formulas behind that, but the way that damage is calculated is that you take your size and your strength, add them together, and then divide that result by 6, and that's how many d6s you're rolling for damage.
Okay.
Okay, let's take, for example, the Griffin. So the Griffin has a size of 40 and a strength of 40. So that adds up to 80. And if you divide that by 6, that's about 13. So it should do 13 d6s of damage per the normal rules. But according to Bestiary, it does 8 d6 damage. Why? No idea. It might be because a Griffin can make 2 attacks in the same round, so they reduced it by 5. The -5 is a standard modifier in the game, so they reduced it by 5d6. But they haven't explained like the rationale for that, so sometimes they just do it that way. Another one of my house rules is like a homebrew damage system, because I didn't really like how damage was calculated in the game. So I made my own damage system, and that's a lot more consistent with how monsters are handled. But yeah, so sometimes the damage done by monsters is just divorced from the statistics, and they don't explain why.
All right. But still kind of similar.
Yeah.
Okay. How are like named characters treated in the campaign? Like you were mentioning, like not wanting to piss off Galahad, or no, you said Gawain, I think.
Gawain.
Yeah. Or Gawain, Galahad, Lancelot, King Arthur, Merlin, all of these like people from the Arthurian legend. Is there a way to play as those characters, or are you more interacting with them as NPCs?
I can't remember where I read this, but it was an article written by Greg Stafford on why he wrote the game. Or maybe it was an essay that was republished in a recent article by someone else. I don't remember. But right. he basically wrote that when he read Arthurian stories, there are always all these knights hanging around. Lancelot would be giving some speech at court, and it would just describe these like masses of knights surrounding. and they're not all fans of him. They're all they might be doing other things. They might be watching or whatever. But Greg was like, what are those knights? And so Pendragon tells the stories of those other knights. It tells the stories of the lower knights, the background knights, all of that. What are they doing in the setting? What are they doing in the campaign? Because clearly the great heroes, the great knights, are not the only heroes. So Pendragon is actually a lower powered campaign. It is not a you become a legend like Lancelot type of campaign. It theoretically can be. I think the glory rewards are a little too low, and one of the things I do in my games is I rebalance glory a little bit so that it is possible but very hard to get to that level, but it is possible. Mm-hmm. But you don't usually get to that level. You usually hang out at the lower level. And so your ambition is not really to become like the greatest knight in the realm, but it's to become one of the 150 knights of the round table. It's not to become a duke or a king or whatever. It's to become maybe the castellan of your lord, to manage his castle, or to become his marshal and manage his army, right? Like those are the sorts of ambitions that you're usually aiming. Those higher level people, the great knights, and they are treated as NPCs. Usually, a campaign will focus on a handful of them, and run with those. So, like my campaign that's on hiatus, the ones we focus on most are Count Robert, who's the Count of Salisbury, but he's still a teenager, so he's a squire right now. He's a squire to one of the players. It's going to be Gawain because one of the players is going to get Gawain as a squire. It's Morgan Le Fay. It's Queen Igraine. It's Duke Ulfius of Silchester is a major one for us. A character I made up who's not actually a legendary character. I made him for the setting. Duke Edward is a duke of a particular duchy that doesn't get a lot of attention in the Pendragon material, so I thought I could write some stuff for it. So these are some of the characters that get a lot of attention from us. Then my current campaign that's going on Sundays, we our focus characters are Sir Kay, Arthur's brother, Sir Hervis de Revels, who's a foreign Aquitanian knight, who's very famous. We focus on Sir Ufo, who's the son of Duke Ulfius. We actually still focus on Count Robert, even though he's not their lord. In this one, he's more of their rival, which is really fun. But yeah, so depending on like which characters the players end up interacting with, and who you present them with, who creates conflict in the setting, different campaigns are going to gravitate towards different characters. All the characters are technically present in every campaign, but like you're probably not going to focus equally on all of them because it's going to be just too many NPCs for a campaign to really focus on.
Yeah, like I know Tristan and Palamedes are like one of the more famous knights within the King Arthur story, but I think they take a backseat to like Galahad, Gawain, and Lancelot, and most of the.
Well, here's the interesting thing. I have one of the guys on the Pendragon server. His group during the Anarchy period basically got into so much trouble with so many Saxon kingdoms that they went and begged Cornwall for help. So they became vassals of Cornwall, and essentially, ever since the Anarchy period, they've been running a Cornwall-based campaign, not really a typical Salisbury-based campaign. And so their entire story has been about King Mark and Tristan and Isolde and those characters. It's been far less about like Lancelot and stuff because Lancelot's off literally on the other side of Britain. Like his castle is up in the north. So it's really interesting to see how different campaigns end up going in radically different directions. Palamedes is one of my favorites, so I do want to make him more prominent in my campaign. In one of my two campaigns, probably the one that's on hiatus because one of the players, she is actually a huge fan of Palamedes.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, we'll see how it goes. He's not come up yet. I do know actually in my Sunday campaign, Sir Sagramore is about to become pretty important because we started playing with the pre-generated characters. One of the pre-generated characters is from Byzantium, and Sagramore in the Great Pendragon Campaign is a Byzantine prince. He's come over to Britain, and the player character, her role was to be like the Byzantine Emperor's emissary to Britain, and now it feels like she's being replaced by someone more important now that something important's actually happened. So it'll be like it might be an interesting friendship, it might be an interesting rivalry. We'll see how it goes. But I'm really interested to see how it plays out.
Oh, that's cool.
So I do try to draw on some of those lesser known ones. Um, I love Gawain. He's my favorite character, so I have a tendency to pull him in everywhere. Yeah.
I forget. He's the one in the Dame Ragnell story, I think. I love that story.
Yeah, that one. The Wedding of Sir Gawain and Dame Ragnar.
Yep.
Yeah, he's one of the two rival families that gets into a huge rivalry, ends up splitting apart the Round Table. That's it. Basically, is led by him and his brothers in Mallory's story.
There's so many stories.
Yeah, well, Mallory's story is really relevant because it's the one that drives the GPC. It's the one that GPC is based on.
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest one
Yeah.
with like that and the Return of the King, probably.
Yeah.
Or
You mean the Once and Future King?
yeah, sorry, yeah, that's what I meant. Not the Lord of the Rings one.
Not Lord. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, T.H. White's. Yeah, I feel like another one we didn't even touch on there was like Percival. Like he's a very important character.
Oh yeah. One of my friends who left the campaign because he just doesn't like Pendragon system. Percival is, I think, his favorite character. So I was really going to make Percival a big part of the campaign for him. Unfortunately, he just doesn't like Pendragon, which is fine. It happens sometimes.
So, what drew you to the King Arthur and Pendragon story initially?
Honestly, nothing. When we were voting on what to play after Seventh Sea, I voted against Pendragon.
And now it's captured you. Okay.
Now it's my favorite game of all time. So I mean, I think it was just the way that my game master ran it. He made it very engaging. It was very dramatic. It was very emotional. There was like once I had actually played it, I realized it was doing the things in a system that I'd always wanted. Okay, so let me tell you the contrast between myself and my friend. I brought him up a couple times here. His name is Harry. He's probably gonna listen to this. So hi Harry. He's the one who didn't really like Pendragon. He's the one who's running Scion. But he and I have come to RPGs from two totally different directions. I came to RPGs after getting into reading and writing. I've been into reading since I was 7. I've been into writing since I was 9.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really interested. I've always been really interested in dramatic and intense character stories. Even as a kid, I was really into that aspect of it. I really like Magic Treehouse, not because they were time traveling to different parts of history and stuff like that. I really like Magic Treehouse because it was about a brother and sister doing adventures together.
Well, about books specifically.
Well, yeah, that as well. And I know that like my brother and I would often do stuff together when we were young. So it was like really relatable to me for that reason. It's why I got into Percy Jackson more than I got into Harry Potter, because I think Percy Jackson focuses more on the personal character story, while Harry Potter focuses equally on like the social dynamics and the political situation and all that, especially in the later books.
Mm.
So I've always been into that kind of stuff. My friend Harry has had the opposite trajectory. He got into RPGs as a teenager, and then as an adult got into reading and writing. So his interests, and he might disagree with me on some of this, which is fair, but his interests, I feel, tend to lie more in solving complicated problems as a character and being someone competent in the RPG, in like the role playing game.
Uh-huh.
To have like that kind of wish fulfillment of playing someone who's very good at what they do, right? So
Yeah.
He will usually play a character who's very good at one or two things, and he will want conflicts in the game that allow him to exercise those abilities to solve problems in unique and interesting ways. I've GM'd for him. He's great at doing that. It's very clear that this is where he finds fun, and it's very clear that this is what he likes to do.
Yeah, that's a very common player type.
Exactly. I don't really like to do that. I am the kind of guy who will create a character who's very good at something, and then give him an emotional problem that makes him very bad at that thing. And while I will still design my character to be able to solve problems with the party, I want to play with a group and with a game master who is open to the idea of a story that is focused more on character flaws than like problem solving, right? So an example from Seventh Sea was like my character was doing a redemption arc in that from like bloodthirsty pirate to hero, and so
Yeah.
he had just done something like pretty like not good, and his friends had like berated him for it. So then when they got into a fight, he did not fight. He just kind of sat down in the kitchen while they were all fighting downstairs. And they got so mad at him afterwards. And I asked them, like, before I did that, is this okay with you? Because I think it would be an interesting story beat. And they were like, yeah, it's fine. Our characters are going to be pissed at your character, but this is actually really interesting. So it was good. But what Pendragon does is that it just kind of mechanizes all of that, right? Like, it puts it back into the game system. It puts it into the stuff you're playing around with. So then you don't actually have to mess with the system to do that, right? Like, Seventh Sea is a system of competent characters being very, very competent. You automatically succeed within your action economy, right? If you have 3 raises, you succeed at 3 things relating to your approach. I was playing against the system by doing that. Whereas with Pendragon, your flaws are right there. You have a 16 in lustful. You can't not go to the brothel in every city you're going to, right? Like, that's just something you're going to do. Even if the woman you find steals all your money or gets you to spill important secrets, you're gonna do that because it's just who you are, right? And it makes those flaws a huge part of your character's storytelling, and then it dramatizes them through the types of conflicts we've been talking about, right? Through marriage, through loyalty to your lord, through loyalty to your friends, and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I ultimately discovered, oh, Pendragon is amazing. It's exactly what I want in a game. The only other games I really found that do this kind of thing for me are Legend of the Five Rings and Delta Green. I've only played a little bit of Legend of the Five Rings, and I've not yet played Delta Green. But these kind of hit the same points for me, where they are about characters' own personal flaws and personal failings rather than solving the larger problem. Even though the solving the larger problem aspect is there, but it's about the personal drama, which is where I'm really interested. But that's kind of what Harry wanted to, like, there was a particular plotline we were focusing on regarding intrigue in Salisbury, and I wanted to focus more on like an episodic style campaign where we go do adventures in different parts of Britain, and then we come back and each time you gather glory or each time you go out and meet different NPCs, you develop the drama a little bit more over time, which I think is more of a standard Pendragon campaign. And I think the other players wanted to do more of that as well. But it wasn't really Harry's thing because it's not like you are working on solving this one concrete problem that's already in front of you. You're going off and doing different things. So it's different approaches to that. And I think his approach to writing, which is really interesting, his approach to writing stories is very determined based on his approach to RPGs, which came first. And my approach to RPGs is very much based on my approach to writing. So we just came at it from 2 totally different angles, and we still play together and we have a lot of fun. He's like one of my best friends and one of the best people I play with. But it is really interesting to look at that contrast and see, like, how did we develop such different tastes and such different trajectories in these 2 hobbies that we have.
Yeah, it's really neat to like have that type of self-discovery come through the game as well. I like that.
Yeah.
I was thinking while you were saying that the sort of means you have to control your character in Pendragon seems to be in how you use your ideals, like, because you can sort of apply it in different ways, I guess, as long as it's still rational.
You mean passions?
Yeah, yes, your passions.
Yeah. So there is a lot of that in the game. Yeah. So now it does turn into, like, a lot of players will try to justify, like, anything is like a hate Saxons role or anything is a loyalty lord role, and GMs have to be wary of that. I tend to be more liberal with it only because, again, you might have noticed at this point that I have a lot of house rules for the game. One of my house rules makes the passion crisis, which is a new mechanic in 6th edition, a lot harsher. So you want to be careful using passions, because if you trigger a passion crisis, which can happen if you, like, fail while you're inspired, or if the object of your passion is threatened or anything like that. Mm-hmm. Like, if that happens, then you get into a lot more trouble with my house rules than you do in Raw. So that's how I control it. Different GMs control it in different ways. Some GMs control it by just not allowing it as much, and that's fine as well. Pendragon is only like 80% well designed. I think that every edition has like 20% bugs, and I think 6th edition is no different. It changes things, it fixes some things, but it also creates new problems in the process. So every game master is going to have to make changes and house rules and rulings to resolve these problems as they go along because there are gaps in the system, there are issues with the system, and nothing's perfect. Now, granted, the full 6th edition line is not out, so I might stand corrected. Like, there might be gaps that exist now, but they're just going to be patched in the Game Master's book. But as it's like, it looks like it's just a new version of Pendragon that improves on some problems, doesn't really, but creates new problems or doesn't improve on all of them. I would say that that's kind of the issue, and passions have always been a bug because they are a good idea, but I don't think they've ever been like super well implemented. They've like in old editions, you used to have like a huge long loaded passions list. In this edition, they have what's called passion courts. So your passions are organized into 4 categories, which are capped. So your total between all the passions in that category can't go above 40, which means that your passions, you usually have fewer passions of smaller numbers, but it also means that you're constantly doing accounting every winter phase. Like, and as one passion goes up, you have to reduce your other passions, right? And that is the kind of finicky thing that players sometimes make mistakes with, and it's very hard to track. Whereas like before, everything goes up by 1 point at a time, unless the game master tells you. And they've got other issues like I don't smoothly with traits. The passion crisis, as in the rules is written, is mostly good, but it has a few issues. And I don't think they've ever figured out a good way to handle melancholy, which is if you succeed on a passion crisis, then it means you successfully had a crisis, right? Which means you become melancholy. And the effects of melancholy, I don't think they've figured out a way to do it in a manner that is particularly satisfying on a dramatic level. Luckily, Pendragon has a great community surrounding it, so you can always ask people for advice. A lot of people use various house rules developed by me or by 1 or 2 other members of the community, or by themselves.
That's cool.
So so a lot of us have worked a lot on this to patch those holes, but yeah, it's not a perfect system. But what system is? I mean, if you're playing D&D 5e, you know what an imperfect system is like.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Everyone makes their own little tweaks to it, and
exactly.
there's a lot of shared tweaks, and it's always going to vary. What I was curious about was how the system felt for because like you're dealing with something that has like defined events in it, so like your creative power as a DM is somewhat limited because Uther dies in this year, and in this year like King Arthur pulls the sword out of the stone, and these are defining events that the characters react to. So how much do you feel like you have your own like storytelling agency within the campaign versus being sort of maybe trapped isn't quite the right word, but that where it's defined by the mythos?
Yeah. So one of the best descriptions of the Great Pendragon Campaign I've seen is that it's not a campaign. It's a scaffolding to hang a campaign around. There are defined annual events, but players don't always participate in all of them. They'll probably participate in some of the main ones, like the death of Uther, the drawing of the sword in the stone. But like they might not be there when Arthur meets with the talking eagle that gives him prophecies, right? They might not be there when Uther presents Excalibur to the court. They might not be there when Lancelot rescues Guinevere when she's been kidnapped, right? Like there's a lot of events in the campaign that they might only hear about. And this is one of the things I had to learn. Like early on, I would focus a lot on the pre-written events, the defined events. But as I've developed as a game master, and as I've come to understand Pendragon more, I've come to realize that a lot of the most interesting stuff happens on the ground level. It happens not between great knights and stuff like that, but it happens between regular knights. It happens between, you run a manor and you have a problem with the guy who runs the manor next to you. Like that is a lot more interesting for most sessions than the defined events. So a lot of what's going on in our campaigns is really personal. Like we recently, because two of our players were missing. That was kind of a predefined event, but I really developed the adventure around it. And it was really just fighting a monster, right? Like it wasn't anything complicated. that was like the only predefined event. It was maybe like half an hour of the 4 hour session. And then the rest of the session was there was drama between one character and her new husband. There was drama between there was this like new storyline developing where this guy who'd always wanted to join Salisbury as a knight was now being courted to join Silchester instead because they were looking for new knights to use against Salisbury. Salisbury are their rivals. So this ended up being one of our best sessions because we didn't focus on the higher up events. We focused on the lower down stuff. And I think most sessions in most campaigns end up focusing on this personal drama stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Pendragon system is really good at. The other thing I'll say is that the system has a lot of randomness in it. The D20, as you know, is very swingy.
Yep.
The traits and passions are built around this swingy mechanic, which means that you will often get characters acting in unexpected ways. So you as a game master, and this is something I like. I don't like planning. I do prep some things. I prep some NPC moves and stuff like that. But I really like when a goes kind of off the rails because a player's roll on their traits goes in another direction. They fumble something or they crit something that they weren't supposed to. And now we're in a totally different direction. Like the example I gave about the player choosing between the rich wife and his lover, right?
Uh-huh.
I really like the system because I don't know what's going to happen. So for me, the story itself, even for me, the story is discovery. Because I'm watching the players make decisions or roll to make decisions, and I'm discovering the story along. I do some things for the NPCs, but I throw them in there, and then I watch the players react. And we build stories out of that. So I think most of the time, it doesn't really affect them. There's a few events, especially like right at the start of a campaign where you're just following along for a bit. But most of the time, you are able to just kind of do wherever you want to take the story. You can do what you want as a game master.
Okay, cool. So the actual play of the Great Pendragon Campaign doesn't focus on like the canon events, so much as use them as like a backdrop for other Arthurian kind of inspired stories. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not prescriptive. It is a scaffold.
Mm-hmm.
Your character stories won't necessarily follow Arthur and Lancelot, but they also won't run completely in parallel. You'll be part of some of their events, and then other times the events will happen, but your characters will be off doing something else that's personally important to them,
Mm-hmm.
or just off doing something else that's important to someone else. Like Arthur might host a feast where some great marvel happens and some great NPC storyline is advanced, but you are up in I don't know, like you're up in the mountains of Cambria, hunting for the best wine in the world because you've heard that this is a great adventure that many knights have taken and failed at, and you want to be the one who succeeds. Or maybe you're competing for in this competition to win the kingdom of the Circle of Gold, which is a legendary kingdom that's kind of hidden from the rest of the world behind like a magical veil, right? So there's all these different things you could be doing, whether they're personal, whether they're these grand adventures. And you might sometimes be there when Arthur is doing great things. You might sometimes be part of those events. You might sometimes even be instrumental in those events. I mean, in my campaign, we have one character who's killed the husband of Morgan Le Fay. So that's not going to have any consequences for her.
She has a husband?
Yeah, Morgan gets married to King Urian of Gore, and now I think in a lot of these legends she doesn't like Urians. It's not a pleasant marriage, but they have a son named Yowain, who's a pretty big Arthurian knight. Yowain he has his own romance. I think it's this guy.
Okay.
I think he's the knight of the lion.
No, I never knew that story. Okay. I knew that she'd sort of slept around to try and like get allies for Mordred, but I didn't know that she'd actually married someone as part of that process.
She doesn't sleep. Well, it depends on which source you look at.
Yeah.
I don't think she sleeps around to get allies for Mordred in Mallory. In Mallory, I believe, if I remember correctly, I've not read Mallory yet, but I've read of Mallory.
Mm-hmm.
I've read like summaries and stuff. I believe that she's one of the ladies on the boat that takes Arthur to Avalon. So in the background of Mallory, she's having like a redemption arc
Oh,
where
okay.
she comes around from being like a big villain in his kingdom to like embracing him as her brother and taking him home, basically.
Huh. Okay. That's
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, but back to the point. Yeah, back to the point. Yeah. So sometimes your characters might influence major events. Like we killed King Oriens, which is not actually supposed to happen. He's supposed to become one of Arthur's most loyal knights, but we did that,
yeah.
and it's going to have knock-on consequences as we continue through the campaign.
Yeah. I was also thinking like one of the canon events that they'd almost have to participate in would be the wedding to Guinevere.
Yeah. So the wedding to Guinevere happens after the defeat of the kings who are rebelling against Arthur as he rises to become High King. Um, this is one of my frustrations with Chaosium. Um, I don't think that they're very good at creating adventures for Pendragon. Like they're clearly good at it with Call of Cthulhu, and they've designed
Hmm.
some great adventures in the past for Pendragon. But I find that with Pendragon, they very often miss what I think are the interesting parts of the stories. And they recently released a new adventure book called The Grey Knight Campaign. Now, The Grey Knight is a kind of legendary adventure in Pendragon and in really the RPG space that was written in 1986 by the same guy who wrote the Masks of Nyarlathotep campaign for Call of Cthulhu.
Okay.
Um,
Cool. Good stuff.
yeah, like Masks of Nyarlathotep is very sandboxy, but Grey Knight is very linear, very railroady, and it's hard to believe that they came from the same person. In the new edition that was just released, they re-released that adventure, but they released it with two additional prequel adventures that kind of bridge the divide between the Sword campaign, which came with the starter set,
Hmm.
to this. So they bridge that timeline gap. And the first of those is actually a really good adventure where you get to participate in a major battle and you get to take down a giant king, like an actual giant king.
Okay.
And so that one's great. But the second one is so weird because it takes place during Arthur and Guinevere's wedding, except it just says the player knights start outside of Arthur and Guinevere's wedding. Like they don't attend the wedding. They're hunting outside the city for some reason. And then the entire adventure happens outside the wedding, and none of it happens in the wedding. And reading that whole adventure, I was like, dude, this misses the whole point. Like this is not what people want to do. Like the adventure, the actual encounter they designed is a really good one. Like I don't think that like that's a bad encounter. I just wish that they found a better way, a better place to put it.
Easy change, but yeah, that feels really like
Yeah.
okay. Make a roll for like proprietary or whatever stat. Okay, you attend the wedding and you skip the adventure or something like that.
Yeah. I mean in our case, one of our players managed to get herself banished from Arthur's court. So she married Arthur's brother. She killed two kings, including King Uriens. And she managed to get herself banished from Arthur's court by attacking a squire who was saying sexist things.
Hmm.
I didn't want to banish her, but like it was like very dishonorable. She also lost a lot of honor points.
Hmm.
And so she's banished, and she's not banished from the kingdom, just from court. So she still has her lands in the kingdom. She still is able to adventure, still go to battle. She just cannot appear at his feasts in his hall or whatever, like any of those things.
Uh-huh.
What this means is that I actually have a very good excuse to use that adventure as it's written because she can't go to the wedding anyway. So she might as well do the hunting adventure.
Right.
But yeah, the other players will get to go to the wedding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So how is the campaign that you're doing going so far? Because I know you're. I feel like you're still. What did you say you were at? Like, not that far past the stone.
We are now like tomorrow we are starting 513. So we started in 510, which is the stone, and so we're about to hit our fourth year of the campaign.
Okay, so they're still playing their first character. Well,
Well,
hopefully. Jeez.
no, we lost 2 characters already.
Wow, that's fast.
Yeah, so I think we lost the first one. He his name was Sir Everin. In session 1, he managed to seduce a woman with a chaste score of 21.
That doesn't seem possible.
Yeah, well, he got some very, very lucky rolls. Especially because I add modifiers on top of that, like I make it really hard to do that.
And it seems like the kind of thing that might like trigger almost like an accusation of rape in that case, because like she would never do that.
Oh, you figured out what happened next.
Okay, all right.
uh, so that woman was a handmaiden of Princess Guinevere, who then proceeded to accuse Sir Evrain of rape. Uh, and then the woman's father, Sir Pen, challenged Sir Evrain to a duel. Sir Evrain accepted and lost so terribly that he could not fight in the following battle. So that's fine. We go to the next year, and the next year, Evrain is now lordless. He's been kicked out by his lord for raping a woman, because when you lose a duel, everyone believes you did the thing you did, because God is not on your side.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
And even Arthur's not paying him any money. He has to basically forage. And he and his friends are called in to do a secret mission for Arthur, and he sees this as kind of a chance to redeem himself, where they have to deliver messages to a bunch of kings for diplomacy purposes. So they go and do that, and they go to the first king, and the first king is the King of Galvois. It's a kingdom in Cambria and Wales, what's now Wales. And basically, it's led by the Salt King. The kingdom produces a lot of salt. The Salt King is a dishonorable man, and he takes away all of their gifts that they're planning to give to all the kings, and says, they won't like these gifts anyway. It's a good thing I'm here to take them off your hands. The characters, the players, despite my many, many warnings, decide they are not happy with this and pick a fight.
Oh no.
The Dame Linnell, who's the one who later gets banished, she insulted him, and he ordered his guards to kill her. And then she and her friends, instead of trying to defuse the situation, instead started to fight the knights around them. And they were fighting like 2 to 1.
Nothing better than a peace mission with gifts that ends in a brawl.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. In D&D, they would win. In Pendragon, they lost terribly. And nobody died at this point. A few of them were injured. Sir Evrain actually made it out okay. Dame Linnell escaped. She managed to run out of this, and she went back to Carlion, abandoned the mission, lost 3 points of honor, but she managed to get together a group of friends to go back, assault the castle, kill the king, etc. But while she was doing that, Sir Evrain was captured. The others were injured, so they weren't able to. They played second characters helping Linnell.
Uh-huh.
But Sir Evrain was not injured, and so the Salt King. I was like, how do I make the Salt King just that much more evil? So the Salt King stripped Sir Evrain of all his armor and arms, and put him to work in the fields like a peasant, which is like the most dishonorable, disrespectful thing you can do to a knight. This is basically challenging Evrain's knighthood.
Mhm.
If Evrain doesn't fight back, he's not a real knight. And Evrain, so when Linnell then comes back and assaults the castle, Evrain sees this. He tackles one of his guards, takes his sword, and starts fighting the 6 knights surrounding him, all by himself. And he actually manages to get a critical success on his passion roll, so he's doing quite well. But then he takes a really bad hit, and I tell him, look, you're probably going to die here. So instead of dying, do you want to? There's a special rule in the book where you can sacrifice yourself in exchange for some heroic feat that gives you 1,000 points of glory for a glorious death.
Okay.
So he was like, yeah, sure. And so he takes down those 6 guys, but then succumbs to his injuries in the process. So It's a pretty epic death for him. Our other one, much shorter explanation, was just a few sessions ago. The players decided that instead of feasting, they wanted to go raid the Saxons. And while raiding the Saxons, one of them got into a fight with a giant, and that giant cleaved him from head to toe, or head to groin is the description I gave.
Yeah.
Because I wanted it to be more brutal. And yeah, it was pretty bad. Our player, the player whose character that was, made an artwork of it, like made a sketch of it, which was really funny. Let me just find that for you.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's my my favorite thing.
There we go. All right. Huh. What is this done with? Like, it's almost like watercolor. Oh.
I think he did it with a paint app on his iPad or something, yeah, or his computer.
That makes sense. Okay. Well, I'll include a picture of this in a link so that people can see it. This is fun.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, so that's what happened to his character. And I'm not gonna, in case my players listen to this, I'm not gonna spoil my plans, but they buried the character in Anglia, which is a place that is going to become important in our campaign. Like, I had already planned for it to become important anyway, but this just makes it so much better.
All right.
I can tell you what the next few sessions look like, because I know what our next few sessions look like.
Yeah, sure.
So tomorrow, I give my players choices sometimes. I mean, it's a role-playing game. I give them lots of choices.
Right, yeah.
But I give them specific choices sometimes, like structured choices sometimes on like which particular adventure or which particular battle they want to do. So I gave them one yesterday where they get to pick one of two battles to do. So what just happened in our campaign was Dame Linnell, she was asked by Merlin to do something for King Arthur, which is to kidnap a bunch of babies. Now, he didn't explain why, but he strongly implied that he was going to kill the babies.
Mm-hmm.
And he explained that this is because one of the babies born in May in Lothian, the kingdom of Lothian, which is like around modern Edinburgh, is prophesied to be the downfall of Arthur's kingdom. So Merlin is going to get rid of all those babies. And so he recruits Linnell to help him, and Linnell does, and it's a big deal. And now the players have these two options to pick from for a battle. One of them is a battle where Arthur is wielding the Sword of Victory for the first time. And the other one is a battle where King Lot is clearly in a vengeful mood because his son has been kidnapped. So I told them to vote. I don't think they read my descriptions closely here because they ended up voting for the far more difficult battle. Their reasoning was, well, we should probably protect our homes first, which is good reasoning. But the Battle of Fosse Way is going to be so hard. I mean, it's going to be ridiculously hard. I have a homebrew battle system,
mm-hmm.
and in that battle system, I consider an intensity of, so there's an intensity value you roll against every round to determine what happens. An intensity of 15 is like a normal difficulty battle. A 20 is like kind of on the challenging side. A 25 is very hard, and a 30 is probably legendary levels of difficulty.
Uh-huh.
This battle, Fosse Way, has an intensity of 27.
All right.
So this is going to be the hardest battle of the campaign, except for the Battle of Badon Hill, which is going to be the final battle against the Saxons. That's going to be a 30. And the Battle of Camlan, which is going to obviously end the campaign and be another 30.
Yeah.
So this is the third hardest battle of the campaign. They could have picked Battle of Bassus River, which would have been a 15. So it's a big difference. So I'm designing a lot of like narrative things that'll happen. Like there's a king that is very, very good with a bow. So he's going to be basically taking pot shots at important people, and the players have a chance to take him down. There's Morgan Le Fay wants revenge, so she's going to try to lure them into being attacked by a red cap, which is a very tough monster in Pendragon. And there's a few other ones.
It's a tough monster in D&D too, actually.
Yeah, in Pendragon, it's so much worse. This monster has a skill of 28, which means it crits 45% of the time.
Woo, okay.
And it has an armor rating of 20. Most knights do damage of 5d6, so your average damage is not going to get through the 20. So yeah, it's a very tough monster. But yeah, this is what we're doing tomorrow. So we're doing the Battle of Fossoway.
Yeah, and this like baby thing that instigates it is, I think I remember that. That's like an actual thing that Arthur like started doing, and I think in some versions he gets talked out of it.
Yeah, so in some versions, Arthur does it. Arthur orders it. In some versions, Merlin does it. In our version, Merlin is doing it, and Arthur is like doesn't know it's happening. Which I'm not sure. I think that's the version Mallory used, but I might be misremembering. But yeah. And then in a few years from now, there is the Grey Knight adventure is actually about that incident. It features the whole thing is about a woman and a giant knight, the Grey Knight, coming to Arthur's court and challenging Arthur on the murder of babies. They're calling Arthur a murderer of babies. Arthur has no idea what they're talking about. I mean, he's heard the rumors, but he has no idea that people think it's him. And so he denies the accusation, and Gawain rises to take the challenge. And then the adventure is the players help Gawain get a particular magical item he needs to kill the Grey Knight. And so the whole adventure is built around that goal.
We have to clear Arthur of his genocide that he unknowingly had.
Infanticide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, you've been playing Pendragon for a while. Do you have like a sort of broader take on the system that you want to give here?
Yeah. So I like Pendragon. I enjoy a lot of its ideas. I think that while its core ideas are sound, as a system as a whole, I think it's a little unfocused, and I think it's got a lot of issues. I think the designers want it to be too many things at once. I think it would be stronger if it was really focused on emulating medieval romances and tried a little bit less to be a complete like feudal Europe emulation game. Because I think that like all my problems come from that, right? Like the fact that advancement is slow is because you need it to be slow for the generational aspect. Whereas, I mean, I speed up advancement, but so I can keep more of the romantic tone, but I compensate for that on the generational level by one, just making it hard to produce heirs. Like it's hard to get to the level where you are producing heirs, and by that point you might die. Or if you play it safe, you don't get that much glory, you don't get that much advancement, but you produce your heirs. So it's a choice of which one you want to do. Do you want to be more of a romantic hero, or do you want to be more of a dynastic knight?
Right.
So things like that would be useful. There's always every edition of Pendragon has had dump stats. If I'm just briefly glancing at the character sheet now, I can tell you what the ones for 6th edition are. In 6th edition, the dump stats are strength. In skills, it's stewardship. Stewardship has always been useless. In personality traits, I'm gonna have to say it's probably honest, deceitful. Those are pretty useless. In weapon skills, it's going to be bow, or actually any of the ranged weapon skills are pretty useless in this game. They're useful for NPCs, but they're not useful for PCs. So it's just extra things on the character sheet that you don't use. So those are a few of the dump stats. There's always dump stats in the game. The passions have never been well implemented. Every edition has had issues with passions. The ones I'm most familiar with are 5th and 6th edition. 5th edition had very long bloated passion lists where everyone would try to get their passions as high as possible, and they would never roll on the lower passions. 6th edition has some good ideas. It introduced this concept called the passion crisis, where if you fail a passion roll, or if you fail while inspired, you roll the passion again to become to see if you become melancholy. So lower passions, you're less likely to become melancholy. Higher passions, you're more likely. So you're still motivated to roll on the lower passions. Except there's some problems with the way they implemented it. I don't think it makes sense to roll a passion crisis every time you simply fail to inspire. I think it only makes sense if you fail at the task. But then also, like, beyond that, they added this other mechanic called passion courts, where where like all your passions are grouped into 4 categories, which are fidelitas, your loyalty passions, fervor, your like hate love passions, adoratio, your passions of adoration, so like adoration for a woman, or your devotion to God, and then civilitas, which is hospitality, station, and chivalry. And the sum of all the passions within one court cannot be higher than 40. So you can have a few very high passions, or you can have a lot of lower passions. And I think that this comes with several issues. First of all, some of those courts are going to be way more packed with stuff than other courts. Like, there's nothing stopping someone from pulling a Lancelot and just having an adoration passion of like 35, and while stuffing their fidelitas court with lots of little passions, right? And then you just always inspire on your adoration passion, because it'll give you a plus 20 because you're going to auto crit. So it's imbalanced, and that creates problems because you're not actually accomplishing the goal of encouraging people to lower their passions, right? That's the whole point of the passion courts. What they wanted to do was get people to not just take hate passion upon hate passion upon hate passion, but creating this whole complicated system around it, to me, is the wrong solution when you just give better guidance to game masters on when a hate passion should be created, right? Like, that to me is the more obvious solution. Just encourage game masters to give out fewer passions. Don't put an arbitrary cap on it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like a lot of this is more just like people gaming the system, which every system has those kinds of problems. It's just like with D&D, like you have to do a bunch of math to find them, whereas this is just like, okay, just make one passion really big and always try and make it relevant.
Yeah.
Which I can work from like a storytelling perspective. It just makes you sort of a one-dimensional character.
Yeah. I've solved this problem in interesting ways. I think I've gotten rid of passion courts in my game. I have made it so that I fixed the passion crisis table for me is now, if you fail to become inspired, you are disheartened, which doesn't have any mechanical effects immediately. You can still roll. If you succeed, you get a check in the passion. If you fail, then you roll your passion crisis. But if you inspire, you get a +5. If you're impassioned, you get a +10. And if you fail while disheartened, you roll a passion crisis with +0. If you fail while inspired, you roll a passion crisis with +5. And if you fail while impassioned, you roll a passion crisis with +10. And then there's a few other bonuses in there. Melancholy is a -5 across the board to all rolls. However, I have added an additional way to get out of it, which is a thing that I took from Legend of the Five Rings, where you can do something called acting out. It's a little different in L5R, but same concept. Here, you pick a vice trait, so one of your right-hand traits. So this can be lustful, this can be reckless, this can be cruel, selfish, whatever. And you pick one of those, and you act out according to one of those. So you explain how within your current context, within wherever you are, you do something that is inappropriate, and vent your frustrations in that way. And if you do that, you immediately clear the melancholy, but you might upset people. If you're in a battle, you're going to get some kind of negative consequence. So like that's my solution, where you make melancholy more interesting, you make it more risky. Oh, you also lose. I also usually, not always, usually I take away points from passions for melancholy. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to do that, but usually I do. So these are all ways in which I'm trying to make passions more interesting and more exciting. And take away from what I consider just to be like a lot of busy work with the current passion courts, where you have to here's one of the other problems with passion courts. If your passions all add up to 40, then if one goes up, you have to reduce one of the other ones by one. And you have to do this every winter phase. And it's a lot of bookkeeping for like no reason. And if you have a passion court that has a lot of passions, you are almost certainly going to have some passions that go up and some that go down. So it's, yeah, I really don't like the implementation here.
Well, I was curious, like you mentioned dump stats, which, yeah, I feel like games do have those sometimes. But I'm also curious if it's like just your own impression of the system and if other groups would have different opinions about that.
Sure, I can tell you that this comes from my experience as a game master. It also comes from my experience as a player in someone else's game. My character in that game became the strongest character in the game. And she was gaining over 1,000 glory per year. How did I do that? Well, I understood the system well enough to figure out its strengths and weaknesses, and I just placed her in. I just set her up to always succeed, basically. I gave her a lot of size, and I gave her a lot of appeal. I gave her a good amount of dex, a good amount of con, and I gave her almost no strength whatsoever. And she doesn't need strength because you almost never roll strength in the new system. Almost no statistics other than damage are derived from strength. And it's kind of useless in the new system. It doesn't do anything. So in doing that, I believe I earned about 1,700 glory in my character's first year, 1,300 glory in her second year, I think 1,100 glory in her third year, and I was on track for 1,200 glory in her fourth year before that campaign ended. So in part it ended because like I didn't even intend to design my character that way. It just kind of comes naturally to me to be like, yeah, why would I put points into strength? It doesn't make sense. And I think my game master got frustrated that like all the other players who were mostly new to Pendragon were at like 3,000 glory, and I was over here like calmly strolling towards 8,000, right? So that's one of many reasons. There were a lot of other issues in that campaign. There were some problem players and stuff like that. But it is an actual issue with the game that strength is quite weak. I've made strength a little bit stronger myself. I also ask for a lot more strength rolls. Like if characters are trying to do something that requires strength, a lot of game masters sometimes forget that they can do that. But I can tell you that strength is definitely it's definitely used for fewer things than in the last edition. Like in the last edition, strength was an important part of the healing rate statistic. But now the healing rate, like in the last edition, it was strength plus con divided by 10. Now it's just con divided by 5, right? So that is literally a thing that it did in the last edition that it doesn't do in the new edition. And in the new edition, there isn't anything added for strength to beef it up. So it is kind of a dubstep. And I would say that they probably should get rid of size as a stat and make strength do a lot of the things that size did before.
Yeah,
because size is not a thing that you roll in this game. You're never supposed to be rolling size. I actually have had them roll size like a couple of times, but you're not supposed to be rolling size. It's not a rollable statistic. So you should get rid of it, make strength more important, and then go from there.
So I know that you said you have a bunch of different changes that you've made to the campaign and to like the stats here that you're describing. Is there like a sort of online resource that people could access for all these kinds of little homebrew rules that people are coming up with to make the system work better for their campaigns?
Actually, yeah. So one of the moderators of the Pendragon Discord, he has been making a document that has all of the play aids that people are submitting. So some of the stuff that people are putting on here are house rules. Some other things are like generators for knights. Some things are like create your own battle cards or feast cards for Pendragon. Some things are like Excel or Google Sheet character sheets, things like that. And then there's another channel there for house rules. And if you go there, actually, my house rules are all pinned there. I have 5 links in the top message right now.
Cool.
I have my house rules, my winter phase rules, my character generation rules, and then I've got 2 extra documents that have just my combat rules and just my passion rule. So I didn't get to this, but I had a lot of issues with with combat in Pendragon as well. So I've made some rules to streamline it or to emphasize like cavalry tactics and stuff like that. So that's all in the combat rules document. And then below that, you have Morian's house rule. So Morian is another mod of the Pendragon server. He's been a pillar of the community for, I want to say, like a decade at least, if not longer.
Wow.
And yeah, so I've only been around for like a year and a half. Morian's been around for so long. He used to be active on, he's still active on the BRP forums and on the basic role-playing forums on Chaosium's website. And he used to be active on the old Nocturnal forums for Pendragon. So this guy is really old school. I mean, I think he's been playing since like 1st edition, but I think he's been commenting online since 4th edition, which is wild. So his house rules are there, and other people post their house rules intermittently. I don't think that those are pinned anywhere, but it's easier enough to ask them. I can't stress this enough. The number one place that anybody looking to play Pendragon should go is the Pendragon Discord server. There is a very great community of game masters and some players here who are here to help you out in learning the system, in figuring out what house rules you might want once you've tried things, in better understanding adventures and better understanding what a good tone for the campaign feels, in better adapting your vision for the campaign to the system or vice versa, in solving player problems, in coming up with ideas, in so many things. I mean, Morian, who I mentioned earlier, he's considered a slow GM. So he runs like 5-6 sessions per in-game year. And his campaigns last like a decade. So he's on his, I want to say his 3rd campaign now. And like the first one lasted like 10 years and the second one lasted like 12 years. So yeah, it's crazy. So he's obviously got a lot of experience with this game. He's been playing it for actually an enormous amount of time. And some other people, there's people from Chaosium here, or people who contract for Chaosium here. So one of the mods is a guy named Vortimer. He wrote the Book of Sires, which is the family backstory book for Pendragon 5th edition. And he's doing a lot of writing for 6th edition.
Cool.
So he doesn't actually work for Chaosium, but he's a contractor for them. So he does a lot of great work for them. And he's just wonderful. Like he and I, he DMs me more often than I DM him. And it's really great. And there's some other people. There's a lot of other great people. Obviously, I'm there. And lots of people I talk to are there. I highly recommend the Pendragon server. It's excellent. It's got all the resources you'll need.
All right. Well, thanks, Udy. Well, final question for you would be, do you have any like DM advice outside of like the homebrew stuff, but more about like the storytelling aspect of the game that you want to give people?
The first campaign I ran fell apart because I was more focused on wanting to do like an epic, grand story than play to the system's strength and to the campaign's strength and to my players' interests in telling more smaller scale character-focused stories. The grand story thing works better when you don't have a system that really wants to focus more on the personal character emotion stuff. So I wanted to do this like big conspiracy or whatever, and it just didn't work. That's more of a D&D thing. Like I know some D&D GMs who do that, and it's kind of why I wanted to do it, because I'd always heard of it, but it's just not what Pendragon is right for. And as I've grown as a GM, I've learned to move away from that. And the thing that I find more interesting now, and what Pendragon is more interested in, is drama and heartache. It really wants to, like, Pendragon is a game that more than any other old school traditional game, really wants to take characters and explore their personal lives, their social lives, like the things they personally struggle with, and all that. Like it really wants to put them through the personal ringer. It's more interesting for a character in Pendragon to have an argument with his wife than to save the kingdom from a demon king, because there's more interesting mechanics for the argument with his wife. There's more interesting consequences for the argument with his wife, and it's going to be more like, it's more complicated. And that's where Pendragon really thrives. It thrives in complications, in emotional storytelling, in character-focused storytelling, in the smaller scale stuff. That doesn't mean you never should go larger scale. In fact, focusing primarily on the smaller scale stuff can make those larger scale moments hit really, really hard. But focus primarily on the smaller scale stuff. That's where people are going to find the most satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why my current campaign is the best one, because is the best one I've run, because I've learned that it's not about the big epic moments. It's about that little conversation. It's about someone's personal struggle. It's about reuniting with your brother after a decade apart. It's about traveling to a foreign land and falling in love and with the people there, and starting a family there, and realizing that this matters more to you than wherever you came from. It's about those types of stories. It's about humans.
Yeah. There's this idea in storytelling that you want all your characters to have like physical goals and emotional goals that can align but don't always.
Yeah, and if the Pendragon's certainly not the only system to explore that. That particular thing that you are talking about is quite similar to what Legend of the Five Rings does, where in character creation you create a personal goal, and then you create a duty that you have, and there's a tension between that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely other systems that do things like this. Pendragon's not alone in this. Pendragon is just the one that I like the most. I like traits. I like my version of passions, and I even like the passions in 6th edition. I think that they just need a little bit of tweaking, really. Yeah, it's a great system, and I highly recommend it. And I also highly recommend reading the literature, because the literature is quite good.
Oh yeah, well that's the reason the system exists, is because these stories are so good that people want to keep talking about them.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Udy, and yeah, this is really good.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed talking about Pendragon.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Setting the Stage. If you're interested in Pendragon, you can check out more in the episode notes, where there's links to Chaosium and to the Discord server that Udy mentioned, where you can get all sorts of Pendragon house rules and other fun stuff. And if you like listening to this episode, please consider telling a friend so we can have more people listen and have fun together. Thank you for listening.